Have you ever stopped to think about how every major country in the world can owe more money than it could ever realistically repay, and yet everything around us keeps moving as if the numbers done to matter, almost like society agreed to look the other way because acknowledging the truth would shake the foundations of modern life? This is one of those questions that feels simple at first, but the deeper you look, the stranger the world begins to appear, and by the end of this video, you will understand why global debt isn't just a financial problem. It is the invisible engine that keeps the entire system running, and why confidence, not cash, is the real currency behind the survival of nations. Right now, the United States owes more than $38 trillion. The European Union carries something close to $14 trillion, Japan sits above $9 trillion, and even wealthy export giants like Germany or oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia owe staggering amounts that grow every year. The global total has already crossed $315 trillion, which is nearly 3 times the size of the entire world economy. And if you look at those numbers long enough, you start to wonder how a machine this big can keep running without collapsing under its own weight. But here is the twist that most people never hear. The world doesn't owe this money to some mysterious external power. The world owes this money to itself, but that doesn't mean everyone benefits equally, and it definitely doesn't mean no one pays the price. The truth is that modern debt is not an accident or a mistake. It was engineered centuries ago, and today it is the central pillar holding up everything from national budgets to your local savings account. To understand this, we need to go back in time. In 1694, England was fighting a costly war with France and running out of gold. Without money, the war was lost, so King William III turned to wealthy merchants and proposed something revolutionary. He asked them to lend money to the crown in exchange for steady interest payments backed by future taxes that had not even been collected yet. To manage this system, they created the Bank of England, and without realizing it, they had just invented the modern concept of national debt. This was the moment when governments gained the ability to spend money they did not have, and lenders gained a new kind of power because they now held promises backed by the entire productive future of a nation. Other countries copied the idea. France, the Netherlands, and later the newly formed United States used the same method to finance revolutions, expansions, and wars. Very quickly, debt transformed from a sign of weakness into a measure of credibility. The more a country could borrow, the stronger it appeared. Empires used to conquer land to take gold. Now they issued bonds to collect interest, and the battlefield shifted from physical territory to financial leverage. Fast forward 3 centuries, and that old system has grown into a massive global network where every country owes money, every bank lends money, and every citizen participates in ways most people don't even realize. Through taxes, savings accounts, pension contributions, and retirement plans, everyone is somehow inside the same loop. And when you trace the ownership of these debts, you almost never arrive at a single villain. Instead, you end up inside a circular maze where the end connects back to the beginning. The clearest example of this is the United States. Out of the $38 trillion the U.S. owes, roughly half is owned by American institutions such as pension funds, banks, mutual funds, insurance companies, and of course the Federal Reserve. Only about 1/3 is owned by foreign countries, and even inside that group, the distribution is different from what most people imagine. Japan owns around $1 trillion, China owns about $800 billion, and the rest is spread across places like the United Kingdom, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Switzerland. So when people say that America is controlled by China because it owes China money, they are missing the bigger picture. China holds roughly 2% of the total U.S. debt. The overwhelming majority is domestic, which means the United States mostly owes money to itself. This creates one of the strangest loops in modern finance. The U.S. Treasury issues bonds that American institutions buy, and in many moments of economic stress, the Federal Reserve buys those same bonds as a way to inject new money into the economy. That money circulates through government spending and interest payments, which eventually reach retirement accounts, pension funds, and investment firms that go back and reinvest in more government bonds. This cycle is not a flaw, it's the design. The system depends on it continuing, and the United States is not alone. Japan buys American bonds. The U.S. funds the IMF. The IMF lends to developing countries. Those countries hold foreign reserves in American or European bonds. Europe lends to developing nations which reinvest their reserves back into Western assets. Every country holds someone else's promise, and every promise is backed by another promise, creating a global daisy chain of IOUs tied together by nothing except belief. The only reason the system works is because no major player wants to walk away from the table. Behind this chain sits another layer of power, the global financial markets. Hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, pension giants, central banks and asset managers control tens of trillions of dollars, and they play a crucial role in deciding how expensive it is for a country to borrow. When these institutions believe a government is stable, its bonds remain cheap and easy to sell. But when they lose confidence, interest rates surge, currencies crash, and sometimes entire governments collapse. Political leaders govern countries, but markets decide whether those leaders survive. At the center of this process stand central banks. They do not just manage debt, they manufacture it. When the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, it creates new money in the process, which means every dollar in circulation represents debt somewhere else. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Money itself is debt created through the promise of repayment that no one actually expects to happen, because repayment is not the goal. The goal is stability and continuity. This system has been running for decades based on one fragile ingredient: confidence. As long as investors believe governments will keep paying interest, even if they never pay off the full amount, the machine keeps turning. But when that confidence begins to shake, everything else shakes with it. We saw this clearly in Greece in 2010, when the government could no longer carry its debt load. Investors panicked, interest rates skyrocketed, and Greece was forced into harsh austerity programs imposed by larger institutions like the IMF and the European Central Bank. Entire industries collapsed, jobs disappeared, and an entire generation paid the price. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a national curse. In Sri Lanka, the government ran out of foreign currency, which caused fuel shortages, political chaos, and massive public unrest. Whenever the music stops, the invisible creditors suddenly become visible. Ratings agencies, international banks, investment funds, and foreign governments reveal themselves as powerful forces capable of reshaping national destinies. Yet even after every collapse, the same pattern repeats. Old debts are restructured, new loans are issued, and the cycle begins again because modern debt is not designed to be paid off.
It is designed to be rolled over forever. Governments today treat debt like a subscription service. They issue new bonds to pay off old ones, and investors show up again and again, not because they expect repayment, but because they expect the interest. The interest is the product. It is the fuel that keeps the global system breathing. Japan has been rolling over its debt for decades, already exceeding 250% of its GDP, and yet its borrowing costs remain near zero. Investors do not worry about being repaid, they worry about continuity. They trust that Japan will keep rolling over its debt, just like the United States and Europe. Government bonds have become the safest assets on Earth. Pension funds rely on them. Banks use them as collateral. Central banks treat them as a form of money. If governments suddenly paid off all their debt, the world would lose its foundation, the supply of stable assets would shrink, the money supply would collapse, and global markets would freeze. So ironically, the world needs governments to stay in debt. Governments cannot pay off everything because doing so would destroy the structure the system depends on. This is why political speeches about eliminating the national debt are more theater than reality. The goal is not to eliminate debt. The goal is to maintain trust in the continuous cycle of borrowing, because once trust fades, the numbers do not matter, interest rates explode, economies stall, and the machine relies entirely on people believing the next promise will be honored. But here is the part that most people never think about when economists say, we owe the debt to ourselves. They are simplifying something very unequal. The flow of interest does not move evenly across society. It moves upward. It moves from taxpayers and workers to institutions and investors, from people who depend on wages to people who depend on capital. Debt is not just a transfer between countries. It is a transfer between classes. The system rewards those who hold debt and punishes those who merely pay it. Global inequality rises hand in hand with global indebtedness, and the burden rarely falls on the people who benefit the most. Creditors are not villains, and debtors are not victims. They are both part of a machine that needs constant fuel, but the real danger comes when the machine begins to run out of fuel. When new borrowing can no longer keep up with old promises,
when the expansion slows and the balance becomes unsustainable. At that moment, the question, who is the creditor, becomes painfully personal. Because the uncomfortable truth is that the creditor is not a single country or institution. It is everyone and no one. It is China and Wall Street and pension funds and central banks and governments and investment firms and ordinary savers. It is a system where debt has become money itself. Governments issue debt, banks multiply it, investors trade it, citizens depend on it, and everything functions only as long as everyone believes in the same story. The story that repayment is possible, even if we all know deep down that repayment will never truly happen. Debt once meant bondage, today it means balance. But if that balance ever tips, if confidence collapses, if belief disappears, the world will remember what debt truly is, a promise that cannot be kept forever. If this video opened your eyes to how the global financial machine really works, make sure to subscribe and share this with someone who needs to understand what is happening behind the numbers, because the more you know, the less the system can surprise you and the more control you have over your own financial future.